Morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the role-specific protocol training for coordinators. Michelle and Heather Kaplan and Lisa Okapari-Aragon, the co-investigators, co-PIs of this project, are on as well. We also have a parent who is on the phone. She will not be presenting today, but she has been an integral part of our team in helping us get all this ready to go for y'all. So we are excited to give you a little more information about this study today and hopefully move things forward in our process. So just a couple of housekeeping things as we get started. I know you are all on mute. I know you've been on some other trainings. So throughout the study or throughout the presentation, we're going to have at least 2 stopping points where we can ask for questions. One for sure will be in the middle, and then another one at the end. And if we have time, we might try for another one depending on how things are going. At that time, you can either chat a question into the chat box, or you can raise your hand, or I know some people like to hit the question mark to let me know there's a question. So you can do any of those things. And at that time, I'm happy to unmute you if you want to ask your question or talk with us about it. So we'll do that throughout the training today. And with that, I will go ahead and get started.
Michelle, we can't see the slides yet.
Oh, thank you, Heather.
There you go. Now we can.
Awesome. Wonderful. Thanks, Heather. Now I will go ahead and get started. Okay, we have 2 main objectives today. The first one is to go over the general coordinator responsibilities with you. And we're going to talk about good clinical practice as it relates to the protocol, consent, documentation, and then our Zythos, REDCap, and ICN registries for tracking data and sharing information. And then the second main objective is to review the produce-specific coordinator responsibilities. And we'll go over these in a broad overview, and you'll get stops related to all of these as well. But we're going to cover study advertising, screening and enrollment, the baseline visit and related activities, coordination of subsequent visits, and these include the dietitian follow-up visit, which is an in-clinic visit, the standard of care visit, which is done with their primary GI provider, and the dietitian's phone follow-ups, which are done by dietitians at 4 points throughout the study. And then we'll also talk about the payment of participants, adverse events and withdrawal reporting, and the documentation and reporting in general for the produce study. So I'm going to talk a little bit about your general responsibilities throughout the study. As you know, a main responsibility that you all have is making sure we are using the current version of the protocol. So right now, the current version that you all have gotten is version 4.1, and I know you got a bunch of signatures on that for us, so thank you. We are going to have another protocol amendment going in before we activate sites for the study, and that's going to get us to version 4.2. That will hopefully be going in sometime next week. And we're just going to have a few minor changes in that update, and we are already incorporating those changes into the training today, so it won't be anything new when you get it, but it will be documented in there. And then we will send out that protocol to all sites before recruitment begins, as well as we will keep that most current version of our protocol along with all study-related documents in a centralized location. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. The second main item that you all have to track, as you know, are the consents and assents. And so just as a reminder, we want to make sure everyone's on the most current master consent version, which is 1.4. Each of your sites might have a different site consent version, but for the master consent, that will all be 1.4. And those are either with the IRB now or will be with the next protocol amendment. So you all will be updated to that version. And then the current master assent version is 1.3. And the same is true for that. You'll either already have that or you will be by the time we have you activated. Those will be sent to you, and those will be stored in a centralized location. You'll each have a folder, so your site-specific ones will be in your folder, and then the master consent and assent will be stored in a centralized place. And as well, for any of you who have a HIPAA form, that will also be stored in that location for you and sent to you. So for documentation, keeping with good clinical practice, you will be expected to document many things throughout the study, and this includes but isn't limited to consents in a sense. When you consent participants for the study, we will need those uploaded as well as assents. And then you'll also need to track deviations, violations, and notes to file. We have forms for those, and we will get those to you so that they are available to you in case you need them. Hopefully you won't, but just in case you do. And then for this study, we're asking you to document many things as well, and some of these include all calls and contacts you have with the participants, and then all the data that we need for our CRFs. You will also need to work with your ICN data team at your center to ensure the data is entered into the ICN registry. I know some of you have access to the ICN registry just with some of your duties, and some of you are the ICN contact at your center maybe. But for those of you who are not, you will just need to really work with your ICN coordinator at your center to make sure the data gets entered. So what are the centralized places for finding and documenting information? For this study, we are going to use Zythos. I am told it's easier than SharePoint, so hopefully that will be the case for all of us. I don't know if any of you have used it before, but we will be storing all our study-related documents, including our IRB approved documents there. And this will be where you upload your signed consents and assents and your tracking logs. You will get an email from me sometime over the course of November or December, depending on when we're activating you, with login information for there. So you'll be able to see that main page with all the IRB approved documents, and then you will also get access to your site-specific folder, which will have your site-specific information, and that will be where you'll be able to upload your consents and assents. And then, as we mentioned before, the ICN registry. So just make sure that you're documenting study-related data in the registry. We have learned from other studies, as well as the ICN data people here as well, that data is entered more at like a 60% rate in the registry. And for our study purposes, we really would love for that to be higher. So we are expecting an 80% or greater data entry rate for our study. And then finally, the last centralized location is our REDCap database, where we will have our eCRFs, and you'll be able to get in there and enter the information into those. There will also be a paper companion CRF to all of the eCRFs that are available in REDCap, and we know that will be easier to use. But if you or a dietitian or a PI, whoever, uses one of those paper CRFs, we do need you to ensure that all of that information then gets transferred into the eCRF in the REDCap database. That will definitely be a main responsibility for you all. And then the CRFs that exist in REDCap include screening and enrollment, baseline, the diet visit, that's the in-person one, the diet phone visit, any adverse events and serious adverse events, the disposition form. So you'll use that if someone withdraws early or something else is going on. There will be a diet diary CRF that you will likely not have to do a lot with, as well as a fecal calprotectin one. And then the stool collection log and the payment log, which will be ones that you will be working with. Okay, Heather?
Yep, so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the, kind of as we now start to go through some of the big picture components of the study and how you guys as CRCs are going to be involved in each of those kind of big components of the study. So, sorry. So the first one is around advertising. Next slide. So what we'll have you guys do is develop a site-specific approach for advertising the study to potential patients. We're going to try and make it easy for you by giving you lots of resources to make this work, but you guys know your center and your patient populations best. So of the kind of menu of options that we give you, it's important to figure out what's going to work best for you. So for example, if you're a center that has a lot of referring gastroenterologists in your community, we've created a templated letter that the PI could send to referring gastroenterologists just to make them aware of the study in case they have patients that they'd want to refer. We have posters that we've made that you'll get in your startup kits that you want to make sure are hanging in clinic. If you guys have a clinic newsletter, we've prepared a blurb that you could also include in your study, in your clinic newsletter to make patients aware of the study. If you've got IBD education days that happen at your center, make sure that you're having flyers there to just make people aware of the study. We have some produce pins, which those of you that have been at the community conference have seen iterations of the produce pins, but having providers and clinic staff wear the pins that just generate buzz, generate interest, making sure that's happening. If you have a GI center website for your center, maybe linking that to our produce study webpage, again, just to create buzz. And if it's worked in your center to do mass mailing of an introductory study letter to patients in your clinic with study information, that's another thing that we have as a template for you that you could try. Again, for you guys, the biggest thing is to make sure that once you guys decide what you want to do around advertising from this menu of options, that you actually make it happen so that those posters are actually hanging and the letters are actually mailed and handouts are actually available. And for this study in particular, I think we'll be the most successful if we create a pull for participation. So we have patients and families coming to you guys at your center saying, hey, I heard about the study and I really want to do it. I think for this study in particular, where it's a long study, which we'll talk about in a little bit, 34 weeks, and it's around a diet intervention, so that's a lifestyle change for the patient and the family. Having people come to you guys that are actually read about it and are intrigued and are interested is going to be the most successful way, I think, to recruit patients. Next slide. So again, we have all these advertising resources available to you. This is one example of our one-page flyer, IRB-approved flyer. So, and we've got kind of two buckets of resources for you to advertise within your clinic so that the other GI providers in your clinic taking care of patients and the other staff in your clinic know, as well as materials for patients and families. So for your PI, we're providing a introductory PowerPoint slide deck so that they can do a demonstration of what the study entails at a division meeting or something like that. We will provide an email template that they can send to providers, or you can send to providers and clinic staff, just letting them know about the study and their role in supporting that. In addition to kind of that burst of advertising at the beginning, it's also helpful to keep the clinic staff and providers engaged so that they know how the study's going and how the study recruitment is going and how the study's progress is going. So we'll provide that as well. Flyers to hang in clinic workplaces to remind people to think about the study when they're interacting with patients, and then the referring letter we spoke about for referring gastroenterologists. And then for patients and families, again, these are actually, many of these are available, or all of them are available on the, no, not all of them. Some of them are available on the study website, but the website's a really good place to refer patients and families. So that's our study website address there. We have the FAQ document. We have multiple flyers. So again, this is the one-page flyer. We also have a fancier trifold version of the flyer. If you're going to do a mass mailing, we have a recruitment letter that you could include along with the introductory or the trifold flyer. And again, those templated blurbs for your clinic newsletters, and then the poster to hang to encourage patients to ask about the study. Next. And just as a reminder, and again, and you guys know this, but anything that's patient-facing must be IRB approved. So we've gone through the step of doing this for you so that you have IRB approved materials. But if you have something that you want to do specific for your clinic or something unique, please talk to us at the Site Coordinating Center so we can figure out a way to help you do that in a way that's in alignment with the IRB. Next slide. So now we're going to talk a little bit about recruitment and pre-screening. So this is a big part of the study. No one's going to be successful in our study if we can't get them recruited and enrolled. So big part of what we need to do well. Next slide. So what we're going to ask you to do is, again, to really think every clinic's a little bit different. So what we're going to teach you today is kind of a general approach to pre-screening, screening, and enrollment. But you guys are going to want to sit with the PI and develop a site-specific workflow that'll help you identify patients, talk about how you're going to approach and contact them, ultimately get them recruited and enrolled. So we'll go through some swim lanes that we've developed for clinic processes, but you're going to want to adapt those for what works best in your clinic scenario, and that's something that you'll review with us prior to being activated. So what we've kind of done to make it easy is to break the approaches to recruitment in kind of two buckets. So there's the patients that self-referral that may have seen an ad or might have heard about it and been waiting in the wings for weeks and weeks, where often in those cases you'll have a little bit more time to coordinate and plan. And then the group of patients that may be identified at a pre-visit planning meeting or at a clinic visit where you say, hey, this patient's coming in soon, or they're here right now, they're having symptoms, and this might be a good study for them. So in a kind of slightly different case where maybe you don't have as much advance notice to be able to plan. So that's why those two kind of approaches might look a little different. Next slide. So just to get us all on the same page, I know some of the terminology and the lingo that we throw around that you've probably seen in the protocol can get a little bit confusing, but we've kind of broken this down and kind of used these terms here to help you maybe think about ways to make this easier. So when we talk about screening, we've kind of broken it down into two phases, pre-screening and screening. So pre-screening would be an approach that you could use, that we're recommending that you use to review eligibility criteria that are static. So you don't have to do that right at the time that they enroll because they're static. Those things aren't going to change. Are they of the right age? Do they have the right diagnosis? We're excluding patients that have a history of a fistula. So you already know in advance, does this patient have a history of a fistula? So these are things that you could do in advance instead of having to do right at the time of the enrollment visit. Whereas screening is kind of that formal check off of the assessment of the inclusion and exclusion criteria at that time of their enrollment. So that includes things that may not have been available at the time of pre-screening, like laboratory or disease activity criteria. And then because we're trying to do this pragmatically, there's some activities as part of the study that are definitely only study related, but we're also trying to kind of attach on to things that are happening in the clinic otherwise for regular standard of care. So their standard of medical visit is a visit that would happen for regular standard medical reasons, but that's happening in close proximity to the time of when they're going to enroll. So here it's within 2 weeks. So that's the visit, because it's a standard medical procedure, where the disease activity index, so either the PUCI or the PCDAI, depending if they have ulcerative colitis or Crohn's, would be assessed, because it's assessed all the time at a standard medical visit. But it's timed close enough within 2 weeks to when they're going to enroll that we can use that measurement for eligibility. And then the baseline enrollment visit is the visit where you're going to complete the eligibility verification, you're going to consent them, and we're going to do all those baseline activities, which we're going to talk about. So downloading the app, teaching them about the diet, etc. This can get confusing because the baseline and enrollment visit and the standard medical visit could happen at the same time. If you're able to coordinate things in advance, like for example, a patient self-referring and they're saying, hey, I'm coming into clinic in 2 weeks, you could coordinate everything so those could occur at the same time. If they don't occur at the same time, we want to have them occur within close proximity, so within 2 weeks of each other. So that might be an example where a kid comes to clinic, they're having some symptoms, and the provider says, hey, they're having some symptoms, I want this kid enrolled in the study, and you're going to want to bring them back within 2 weeks to get them enrolled because they have active symptoms. So that's the thing to keep in mind. We're thinking about those two visits separately because the standard medical visit is kind of part of your regular process, but we're tacking on to that because we need information from that visit. We're tacking the baseline enrollment visit onto that either at the same time or in close proximity to that within 2 weeks. Next slide. So here are the swim lanes that we were talking about, and we have two. So for those two scenarios that we talked about, either self-referral or identification at the pre-visit planning meeting or in clinic. So this is the example of the self-referral one. And this is what you're really going to want to sit down with over the next couple of weeks, look at it, digest it, and see, is this going to work for me, or how is this going to work best in my clinic? Do we need to do something slightly different? And that's what we're going to talk to you guys about at the follow-up activation calls and in this interim period. So, and again, it's broken down into kind of what we've talked about, this idea of identification and pre-screening. How can I find people in advance and at least go through those pre-screening checklists to see if they're eligible? How do I formally screen them to make sure they're included? And then how do I consent and enroll them at that baseline visit? So in this case, with self-referral, the patient's going to contact you guys, your care team. So that could be you. They might contact you. They might contact their primary GI provider or the PI. And those one of those people that's knowledgeable about the study is going to want to explain the study and decide if the patient in fact is really interested. Hopefully they will be because they were self-referred, but they may not really understand the details of the study. Once the primary provider, if they're knowledgeable, or the PIs explain it to the study and they've patient has said they're interested, that's when you can do some pre-screening. You can say, hey, based on the criteria that I know are static and I can check now, are you even eligible? So you would follow up with the participant either by phone or in person if this is happening in the clinic and you're there, to just confirm their interest, answer any questions, and conduct that pre-screening. So if they're too young, then it's an automatic, well, glad that you're interested, but you're not eligible. So you can do some of that work up front. If they're not eligible, then you're going to want to go ahead and stop and document that. If they are, then you're going to want to let the dietitian know and then work on coordinating that standard medical visit and the baseline screening visit to ensure that they're happening within 2 weeks. So you're going to want to make sure that there's a standard medical visit either already scheduled or due to be completed, and that you can time the baseline screening visit where the patient is going to have verification of their eligibility and complete all the baseline activities and make sure that those are within 2 weeks. So at that time of screening, you want to ensure that the patient is eligible, and you guys can figure out a way to make this work best in your clinic. So either the PI can verify eligibility before the patient is consented, or they can designate someone, another provider, that can look at the eligibility criteria and make sure that the patient is eligible, and then the PI can sign off after. So once that's happened, you verified that they're eligible, then you can conduct the baseline screening visit. And again, that may occur on the same day as a standard medical visit if you've had enough time to plan that and the patient and the family can stay. If not, you're going to want to bring them back within 2 weeks. That's an error there. Within 2 weeks to get them consented and enrolled. Next slide. For those patients that are identified either through pre-visit planning or through chart review, or a provider comes to you and says, hey, I'm thinking of this patient, or they're seeing them in clinic right now and saying, hey, I have this patient that might be a good candidate, the process looks pretty similar, but the difference is that you may just not have quite enough as much lead time for scheduling and planning this. But if someone comes to you and says, depending on how you identify those patients, whether that's at the pre-visit planning or someone comes to you and says someone's eligible, you definitely want to confirm with the PI and the GI provider that that patient's okay to approach if they're not the one that brought the idea to you. And once that you've done that, then you have a couple of options. So you can either call the patient in advance, the PI or the GI provider can call the patient in advance to introduce the study before the visit, if you have enough time. If they're bringing a patient to you guys or introducing a patient to you as a potential patient at a clinic visit, then maybe the PI or the provider, someone that's knowledgeable about the study, is going to introduce the study at that visit. So then again, if the patient's interested, that sends you down the pathway of continuing the conversation and starting with that pre-screening. So yeah, they're interested, but are they going to be eligible? So depending on when that initial contact's happening, if it's in person, you can ask to go over some of the eligibility criteria with them and answer any of their questions in person if they have time to stay. If not, you're going to want to follow up with them by phone. And if it was already a phone contact, then again, you're going to want to follow up with them by phone to do the pre-screening. We'll talk a little bit about that. So then if we think they're eligible by pre-screening, we're going to want to get them scheduled for their enrollment visit. And again, that's going to require some coordination on your part to make sure that there's a standard medical visit happening within 2 weeks of the baseline study visit, and then coordinating that with the baseline study visit for them to be consented and enrolled either at the same time as that standard medical visit or within 2 weeks. And then again, before you enroll them, there needs to be a process for verification of eligibility either by the PI or his designee before you actually enroll the patient. So again, I think busy slides here. You guys are going to want to sit with these, make sure they make sense to you, figure out how you do this in your clinic, tweak them to the way that works best for you guys with all the experience that you have in enrolling patients in research studies at your site. And then we'll have a conversation with you guys about how you're going to do it at your site. Next slide. So again, in this process of identification, pre-screening, and screening, your key responsibilities are to meet with the appropriate staff members, either the physicians or the other providers, to let them know about patients that were identified, potentially identified, and to make sure that it's okay to approach those patients. You're going to work with the right staff members in your clinic to identify when patients are identified as approachable, that the appropriate procedures are followed based on how you've outlined them for your clinic. If you run into a patient that says, yeah, I'm interested, but I'm not really ready to commit, it would be your responsibility to develop any follow-up plans to confirm with the patient at a later date after they've had time to think about it, whether they're interested or not. Again, you guys are going to be the ones that are responsible for the pre-screening and screening processes to make sure that those are completed and that the final verification is done by the PI. And then ensuring that contact with potential families that are identified as eligible, so are screened as eligible, and then whether they're interested or not, and whether they meet eligibility or not, is all documented in our screening and enrollment log. Next slide. So again, specifically for the patients that are identified by self-referral, and as the case always, we want to make sure that patients that are interested speak with someone who's knowledgeable about the study so that they can explain the study details, and also that you can link them with information about the study. So they might think they're interested, but they haven't read enough about it to really know. So get them to speak with someone who's knowledgeable about the study, so either the PI or someone at your site who's been trained and knowledgeable, and probably set them up with information about the study, either the IRB approved flyers or the website link. And make sure that if a family is approaching a staff member about being interested in the study and not someone that's not familiar with the study, that you have a process for a warm handoff to someone who's actually knowledgeable. Again, we always want to make sure that the primary GI provider is okay with study participation, so that falls on your shoulders. And then we want to make sure to loop in the dietitian early of participants that are interested in the study, so that it'll make it easier for you to coordinate with the dietitian around the baseline visit. Next slide. Again, and this is true for both, for patients that are identified by self-referral, you're going to want to follow up with the patient either in person or by telephone to complete that pre-screening. It's not worth going through all the effort to get someone out set up for a baseline enrollment visit if in fact they're not going to be eligible based on some of the things that you can figure out in advance. You're going to want to, as we said, determine the best timing of that standard medical visit and the baseline enrollment visit. And I think that that'll require a little bit of negotiation and figuring that out on your part, but it's really important that those are timed close together. So either on the same day or within 2 weeks of each other, so that we can confirm eligibility based on how they're presenting with their symptoms at that standard medical visit. After that standard medical visit, you're going to complete screening before they're enrolled. You're going to ensure, again, that that's reviewed by the PI or his or her designee, and then a final sign-off is done by the PI. And then, as always, if at any time in that process, either pre-screening or screening, the participant is deemed ineligible for the study, make sure that you have a plan to close the loop with the family. They've expressed interest in the study, but for some reason they're not eligible. So we got to make sure that we close the loop with them. Next slide. And then again, similar but slightly different for patients who are identified either prior to or at a clinic appointment. Again, as always, we want to make sure someone who's knowledgeable about the study is introducing the study to the participant, either if there's enough leeway in advance by telephone or at the visit if that's when it works out best. And again, always confirm that the primary provider is good with participation. And then again, same point, in this case, patients aren't self-referring, so you might run into more cases where someone's brought up the idea of the study, but the family's still not sure about participation. So you want to make sure that you schedule a time to follow up with the family to ask some more questions and to see if they are going to be interested in participating. And again, as always, at the relevant points, complete the pre-screening in advance so that you can, not go through all the work of setting up the baseline visit if someone's not eligible, and looping in the dietitian. Next slide. As we said before, again, I'm just drilling home this point because I think as we presented this to other people, this is one of those points that's confusing to people. So just want to make sure we're drilling it home. Again, it's that coordination of figuring out the best time of the standard medical visit and your baseline enrollment visit, whether that's at the same time or within 2 weeks. So that's going to be a big part of what you do. Again, completing screening and ensuring all that's reviewed by the PI. Next slide. So as we said, and prior to scheduling the baseline enrollment visit, you want to pre-screen for eligibility, and that's just to, again, like we said, to make sure that you're not going through all that effort of getting a baseline enrollment visit set up for someone that's not going to be eligible. And there's a handful of ways that you can complete pre-screening, and that we're recommending that you do. So one is a review of the medical record. That'll give you age, that'll give you some of the diagnosis, that kind of thing, which we'll show you on the checklist. You can have a conversation when you do the telephone pre-screening with the parent of the potential participant. That will get at some of the things that are part of the eligibility or criteria around whether they have a phone, with a smartphone, that kind of thing. Can figure out through contact with the ICN data team at your center to make sure the participant's actually enrolled in the ICN registry, and then you can have any questions that you have answered by that patient's primary GI provider. Next slide. So we've made a checklist for you to make life a little bit easier, is what we hope. So to take what's in the protocol and make it practical for you to use, breaking up some of the things that you can do on pre-screening versus things that you have to do a little bit later on as part of the actual screening process, and breaking down what can you find as part of the medical record versus what can you ask the patient and family when you speak to them. So again, can you just hit click one time, Michelle? One more time, sorry. Okay, yeah. So in looking at the medical record review, right, confirming their diagnosis, confirming if they're enrolled in the ICN-2 registry. If they're not, that is a criteria for enrollment. So when you call them to ask them the other questions, make sure that they're willing to enroll in the ICN registry at the same time, or they're not eligible for the study. Again, age, easy things to figure out through the medical record review. Are they enrolled in another study? Is there no hospital or surgery planned within the next 3 months? If there is, then it's probably not worth bringing them in for a baseline visit, because they're not going to be eligible. Some of the past or present history of intra-abdominal abscess, fistula, stricturing disease or ostomy, GI infection, severe malnutrition, recent medication changes, some of those other things that you see there. And then the criteria for enrollment are that the disease activity indexes, which you'll see, have to be done within 2 weeks of enrollment. But the labs, you have a little bit more leeway. So the labs can be done within 8 weeks of enrollment. So if they've had labs recently and you know you're going to bring them back for enrollment within that 8-week period, you want to document that here. And as you remember from the protocol, we went back and forth with this, the laboratory cutoffs use values so many times higher than your upper limit of normal, because everyone has slightly different cutoff values. So on this screening sheet, you can enter what your site-specific values would be based on 1.5 times the upper limit of normal, or 2 times the upper limit of normal as it's written in the protocol, just to make it easier. So when you're quickly looking at the labs, you say, is the CRP higher than this? Is the ESR higher than this? Which is specific for your site. So those are all things you can get through the medical record. And then telephone, you want to follow up and make sure that, in fact, they're English speaking, that they can understand English, that you're not having difficulty talking to them. The key thing to confirm is that they have an iOS or Android mobile phone and a data plan for at least for the parent. That they're not on a vegan diet, that they haven't been using the SCD or some version of the SCD prior, and that they're not pregnant, all things that you can confirm by phone as opposed to easier than the medical record. And then again, at this point, if they pass through all this, these checkpoints, you're going to want to make sure that the primary gastroenterologist is in agreement that they're a good candidate for the study. You're going to want to figure out when you're going to bring them back for their baseline visit, making sure that at that date the labs are going to be recent enough, so they're going to be within 8 weeks. If they're not, talk to the GI provider about getting those labs in advance, perhaps, or at the time of the visit, to make sure that you're going to have them available for screening. And then again, because this is a nutrition study and they're thinking about enrolling in a nutrition study, it's standard of care to get a vitamin D level. So we don't want to stick them for blood draws more than once. So if the provider is going to be ordering labs, to make sure that that's added on. Next slide. So again, this is where that coordination comes in. If you've gone through this process and they're eligible based on pre-screening, now you're going to have to start coordinating when's the right time to bring them back for that baseline medical visit, and how do I coordinate that so that it's within 2 weeks of a standard medical visit. So if they're eligible based on pre-screening, identify when their most recent or upcoming standard medical visit was, determine if that was recent enough. If not, talk to the GI provider about it, and then schedule that appointment for the baseline enrollment visit, either at the same time if the provider's going to bring him back for a standard medical visit, or if not, if the standard medical visit had been more recent, then to schedule just the baseline visit, so that happens within 2 weeks. And again, making sure that we're doing a good job to coordinate lab work, so making sure that the standard lab tests, if they haven't been obtained and they're going to be obtained, that you'll have the results available at that baseline enrollment visit so that you can confirm eligibility, and that if they're going to have new labs drawn, that they include a vitamin D level. And again, as we talked about before, if at any point you find a participant's no longer eligible, but they have expressed interest, of course, thank them for their interest, and let them know that, you'll keep them apprised of other opportunities in your clinic. And if at any point, again, that they say, actually, I'm not interested anymore, this seems like something I can't do, as always, just thank them for their willingness to consider participation. Next slide. So again, just to drill home the same points, if they're eligible based on pre-screening, that's when you can move forward with scheduling the baseline enrollment visit and doing that coordination to make sure the timing works out so that enrollment visit is either at the same time or within 2 weeks of a standard medical visit. You're going to document all this in the screening and enrollment log, which won't look very different to you from any other screening and enrollment log you've used before, just a more electronic in REDCap. And again, if patients are ineligible, we still want to capture that on the screening and enrollment log. That's important to know who we've screened, but who is ineligible and why they're ineligible. And then also, if we screen them and they are eligible, but they're not interested, we want to document that. And if we know why they're ineligible, it'll help us learn as to how to do studies like this with technology, with N of 1 design, and with diet, if we can understand why people aren't interested. Next slide. So we're going to take a pause here, like Michelle said, try something new and make sure it's a lot of information we're throwing at you, and I'm sure you're just stopping and processing and thinking. But if questions are coming up, let's address them now before we move on to have some conversations about some of the other study touch points. Anything coming up, Michelle?
I do not see any questions yet. Does anybody want to put their hand up or hit the question sign? If you have any questions, I can unmute you. And I haven't had anyone chat anything either.
Did I lull everyone to sleep with my voice?
Everybody's eating lunch while they're
yeah.
Okay, I don't see any hands. I don't see any chats, Heather. So guess we can maybe move forward.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Okay, so hi everybody. This is Lisa, and I am going to jump in here and talk about some of these next slides. And we'll take, please, if you have questions, first, we know this is a lot of information that's coming at you, so it's perfectly fine to not have questions right now and to just be digesting and listening. But if there are things that come up for you while we're talking, please don't hesitate to chat it in, and Michelle will either stop me if it's something she thinks we need to address right away, or we will have another stopping point once I get to the end of what I'm talking about, and we'll address it then. So, because we'd love to, if there's things you're wondering about, we'd love to be able to address it now. But of course, we're going to be available to really work with you to think about how these processes will work at your sites. So now I'm going to talk about the coordinator responsibilities associated with the baseline visit. Heather was talking about the pre-screening and, making sure that people are screened. And now let's go on. So next slide. Okay, so you're going to be seeing this picture often, and for us, it's been the best way to detail out the different steps and touch points within this study, which is a long one, right? It's about 8 months for people, so 34 weeks if it's run end to end, just as timed out. So this is showing you all the key touch points associated with the study. And we're starting here at the beginning at the baseline visit. and going to go through the various components of what happens at that visit. Next slide. Okay. We want to talk a little bit about the standard medical visit versus the baseline enrollment visit, just because, again, that may be a little bit confusing. They may happen on the same day. As Heather talked about, they could happen within 2 weeks of each other, the standard medical visit happening first, of course, and the baseline visit happening second. So at the standard medical visit, it's a regularly scheduled medical visit. Visit content is determined by standard of care. The visit is conducted by the primary GI provider. And the patient who intends to enroll in the PRODUCE study should be enrolled within 2 weeks of the standard medical visit. And that's to ensure that the measures of disease activity, the PUCAI and the SCDAI, depending on the disease, are used to determine eligibility, that they occur within those things that are determining eligibility are occurring within the time frame specified in the protocol. So as we said over and over, in some cases the visit might happen on the same day as the baseline visit. In some cases it's going to be prior to that. And then for each potential participant, the CRC will need to understand the planned sequence of the standard medical visit, the baseline enrollment visit, to ensure information for final eligibility and screening, the laboratory studies, everything's available and ready. So now to think about the baseline enrollment visit. Okay, so this one occurs on the same day as the standard visit or within 2 weeks. We know we're repeating it, just want to make sure it's clear. Next. Purpose is to cover all study activities related to consenting and enrolling participants. So this is where you're going to consent, enroll, train people, provide the education that they need to get going with the study. It will be an in-person visit with the participating parent and the patient. The site PI or their designee, who would be, one of the other GI providers, the dietitian, and the CRC will all, have be part of the visit. So sorry, when I say site PI or their designee, the designee does not have to be one of the other GI providers. It would be likely be if it's the standard medical visit and the baseline visit are happening on the same day, but if they're not, it doesn't have to be a GI provider. And then it's going to take about an hour to an hour and a half. So you have to plan accordingly with families. And lab data must be available. And so because that lab data is used for screening and it's going to be obtained within 8 weeks, it needs to have been obtained within 8 weeks of the baseline enrollment visit. So 8 weeks old or less has to be there for this visit to be able to finish the screening and make sure the patient is appropriate for the study. Next. Okay, so CRC responsibilities at this baseline visit. One is to ensure the appropriate people are at the baseline visit. So we just talked about who those were. Ensure that the screening is complete and the patient and family are eligible for the study. So at this baseline visit, you'll want to review the pre-screening eligibility criteria with participants and just make sure, assess for any of those things that could change, just assess if there are changes and make those changes on the screening enrollment CRF. You'll want to review all the remaining eligibility criteria, those things that are assessed at the standard medical visit. And in particular, you're going to be looking for mild to moderate disease activity as measured by the SBCDAI or the PUCAI. And those values are there, and those have to be within 2 weeks of enrollment. And then you're also going to be looking for acute inflammation or elevated acute phase reactant that is within 8 weeks of enrollment, and that would be measured by fecal calprotectin, CRP, or ESR. Every site has different values and upper limits, so that's why we can't give you the specific value. You have to identify those for your site, and then those will be used, over the course of your screening for participants. Next slide. Okay. So here is sort of the screening at the baseline visit checklist. And right here, you can see where there is a spot that you should insert the specific cutoff values for your site. So you're looking for acute inflammation, and you will identify with your site PI what the appropriate cutoffs are based on the protocol as specified, and then you will be able to determine based on the patient's results if they meet criteria or not. Can you hit enter? Okay, alrighty. So continuing on with CRC responsibilities, at this visit, you'll have to obtain all the consent, assent, and HIPAA documentation before starting study procedures, and all those forms get uploaded to Zythos during or after the study visit. You'll have to ensure that all the measures required for screening at baseline visit have been collected and documented for each patient. And again, this vitamin D level is important. You'll want to ensure a vitamin D level was collected at standard medical visit or at least within 8 weeks of baseline enrollment visit. If it hasn't been, you're going to want to coordinate with your primary GI that's seeing the patient when this should be ordered. It is considered standard of care when you start a new dietary intervention to check vitamin D level, and that's really important for the diets that we're talking about here. So if you don't have a current one, you're going to want to, the CRC you'll have that responsibility to be prompting the primary GI and identifying when they feel that's medically appropriate to be ordered. Next slide. Okay, so more responsibilities. Ensure that the parent and the patient, if they're going to be participating in the using the mobile app, have successfully downloaded and can access the study app on their phones, right? Also that the parent, and again, the patient, if relevant, have answered all the baseline questionnaires on the study app during the appointment. So the baseline questionnaires, the start of study questions will be, our participants will be able to answer them right through the app. So they have to get that app, and then as part of that onboarding into the study process on the app, those questions will come up. And your job is to make sure that they are all answered before they leave the enrollment visit that day. The family has 3-day diet diary forms. So one of the pieces of data that we're collecting throughout this study is a 3-day diet diary that helps us understand, are people following this diet as you know, expected? It also helps us evaluate the nutritional adequacy of what they're eating, and the dietitian can use that for their clinical care. So we get a 3-day diet diary at baseline, and they're going to be getting them at the other study periods as well, and we'll talk about that as we go. But you want to make sure that the family has the 3-day diet diary forms, that the family knows how to complete it, and how and when to return them. And we'll talk about that more as we go. The 3-day diet diaries, I want to say they're the only paper-based form that families are filling out over the course of this study. We'll see if I'm right as we talk through this, but I'm pretty sure that is the only thing on paper that we give families to physically fill out and give back to us. Most everything they're doing is on a device, but we do need those diet diaries filled out. So the family also will receive one stool collection kit and instructions. Again, families will also be collecting stool at baseline and then in each of the 4 other diet periods. And they will review you'll want to review the instructions with the family, as well as demonstrate how to use the kit and pack the kits and send them out. Stool is really important for us to evaluate fecal calprotectin, and it's really exciting. We're going to be banking all the stool to do microbiome analysis, and so it's really one of the first studies to have this amount of stool with children and adolescents with IBD to really be able to look at the microbiome and how diet affects that. So it's going to be really fantastic data. It's really important that we get the stool and we get it in the way that the protocol specifies. So we'll be talking about that. You'll want to schedule some of the follow-up visits at this baseline visit. So there's a dietitian follow-up that happens about 4 weeks into the study, and again about 12 weeks into the study. So from this baseline date, and that timing is associated with 2 weeks after they started the first diet, and then 2 weeks after they transition to the next diet. And then the first standard of care visit is about 10 weeks from the baseline visit with their doctor. And again, the ideal is to get all of these things scheduled at enrollment so they are on the books and timed appropriately for the participant. And again, you'll have to work with your site PI and figure out how is most appropriate to do that at your site. And then you'll want to ensure that the participant meets with the study dietitian for the appropriate education regarding the diet and the diet diaries. A big part of this enrollment visit is teaching people about the specific carbohydrate diet and the MSCD, the modified specific carbohydrate diet, if they're getting randomized to that condition. And so really critical that they spend the time with the dietitian. Next slide. Okay, so informed consent. You'll need the consent and assent forms. We have provided you with informed consent checklists, again, to try to make it a little bit easier for you to ensure that you've covered all the relevant parts of consent and assent for this study. So you will have that to kind of follow along and go through as you're consenting people. The informed consent must be signed by a parent or legally authorized representative. The assent must be signed by all patients who are age 11 and older, whether or not they're going to be participating by tracking their own symptoms on the study app. So even if the parent is just, tracking the symptoms and using the study app, 11 and older still need to sign the assent. If your site requires that younger children assign assent, then please, go ahead and follow those requirements. Next slide. Okay, so consent signatures you will be getting for the study. All of you have worked with the consent forms as you've been developing them for this study. So I'm sure you're very familiar with this. Next slide. Okay, and again, the assent signatures, the child's assent, and then the signature of the person obtaining assent, and the dates are all needed. Next slide. Okay, so once you've got consenting done and assenting done, and that's taken care of, a big part of what you will be doing next at the visit is that you will be teaching the family how to download the app, working with the family to download the app, and teaching them how to do the data collection on the app. Most of this study is conducted through the mobile app, and so it's very important that the families have it and that they can work through it and know how to use it. So they will be on the app is called the Eureka mobile app. And we will have a separate teaching session for you guys specifically on the mobile app and the platform that goes along with it. The clinicians, so the coordinator and yourself and the docs and the dietitians will be able to see this Eureka platform on your laptop or your computer within the clinic. Participants will utilize the Eureka system via a mobile app. Okay, so on the mobile app, they will be randomized to the starting diet. Once you enroll them, they get the randomization there, right? And they're either going to start on the SCD or the MSCD, so that's where they'll find out. And you'll find out as well, baseline enrollment visit questionnaires are done on that. They will have daily symptom monitoring that they do. So every day they're going to be asked to answer just a couple of questions. It should take them a minute or less probably to answer those questions, but every day they'll be asked to answer questions on the app about their symptoms. And they're also going to get reminders about study activities. So when do you send in those stools? When do you switch to the diets? Again, this is 8 months. They're switching between things. They have a lot of tests to do. So we're using the app to ping them or trigger them to, set them up to say, hey, this is coming up, get prepared, and then to tell them when to do this. From your end, we will also need, human support of families doing this, right? So you'll be able to see if families have started, have changed, are ready to change on the Eureka platform, but you also then will be, helping to support the families to make sure that they are following along and doing what the app is telling them to do. So during enrollment, please support participants in downloading the Eureka app and setting up the account. They should not leave that enrollment visit. They can't leave the enrollment visit without having the app on their phone, having been registered in the program, having been randomized, completed the baseline questionnaires, and answered their first day's worth of symptom trackers. That all must happen at the enrollment visit. So if they show up at the visit without a phone or tablet, I suspect and most everyone will do this on their phone, you cannot move forward. So one parent only needs it on their phone. If patients are 14 or older, they can download and track daily symptoms too if desired. But they, I would say that if a teen, so if someone 14 or older says, yes, I want to go ahead and participate and track, the parent still must do it. And it really needs to be that the teen is committing to do it, that it shouldn't be like, oh yeah, I'll download and maybe I'll use it or not. Like it really should be, okay, are they committing to also track their symptoms and be part of this? Otherwise it would just be the parent who is tracking. And then you'll want to ensure that all baseline measures are completed on the app during the visit. Next slide. Okay, just a reminder that training is coming soon on the Eureka platform for you guys. Next slide. Okay, so stool collection, fecal calprotectin, and microbiome analysis. So as I said, we are going to be measuring those things out of the stool. Participants will collect home-based stool samples during the baseline period and then at the end of each of the 4 treatment periods. So participants will not be able to advance to their next treatment block until stool is collected and sent. That's how important this is for this study. So they are prompted in the app starting at 2 weeks before the end of each diet period for the sample. And the sample gets sent directly to Seattle FedEx, directly to Seattle Children's Hospital for analysis. And those results, the fecal calprotectin results, are uploaded into the Eureka platform for yourself and for the clinicians to see and to use as part of care. So at the baseline visit, we send them home with 1 stool kit and say, go home and get your stool. And baseline, which is 2-week period, we want them to get the stool as soon as possible, right? Just go home, collect it, and send it in. We don't want them to wait. But then within each diet period, they are expected to collect stool, but we need that stool to be at the end of the diet period because we want them to have been on the diet, right, for a while to see if the diet is actually making changes to the stool, to the inflammation, right, that's measured through the stool. So within each of those 4 diet periods, it's really the last 2 weeks of the diet period, week 6 through 8, that, sort of they will be prompted and expected to send the stool in. But they cannot move forward. The app won't let them move forward. They cannot move forward until that stool is actually physically sent. We don't have to have the results back, but that stool has to have been sent in. Next slide. Okay, so here's some key details. And again, this is, there's a lot of details related to the stool. It's really, you'll have a SOP associated with it. It's really important that you become very familiar with these details and really make sure families understand this. And there will be handouts as well for families. But because the stool will be used for microbiome analysis, it must be very fresh. Okay, so for some of you who have participated in other studies where you're just doing fecal calprotectin with stool, the stool could be frozen for a while in somebody's freezer, not a big deal if it's frozen for a few days and then brought into clinic or sent in. That's not the case here because microbiome analysis needs really fresh stool. So this means that Seattle Children's needs to receive the stool as soon as possible after it was collected. So stool needs to be shipped within 1 day of collection. It should be stored in the freezer. So the ideal situation is this final bullet down here, which is collect the stool in the morning and ship it later that day. That's the absolute ideal. You collect it, you pack it up, and FedEx is there in a few hours and takes it. We realize that is not always going to be the case or possible, right? For a variety of reasons. It should not be stored in the freezer for longer than 1 day, and it needs to be shipped like the next day, by the next day after you've collected it. So if you collect it and FedEx is not able to come that day, too late in the day, etc., then put it in the freezer, pack it up the next morning, and ship it that next day. It shouldn't be kept in the freezer for longer than 1 day, though. And very important, stools can only be shipped on Monday through Thursday because someone's got to be at Seattle Children's to receive it. So that means that stool can be collected like Sunday through Thursday early AM if you can get FedEx there, right? But later in the day on Thursday, so that then it's received Monday it's received Tuesday through Friday at Seattle Children's. Next slide. This is just to show you we have very specific handouts for people on how to collect the stool. It will have the right dates, you know, the information kind of highlighted on it, but you really need to, you know, go through and really work with families to understand the key points associated with this, of what they can and can't do with the stool, because otherwise they're spending all this time and effort to collect the stool, which is not fun for teens, right, and kids anyway. And then it's going to be not, you know, valid results or not as good results for them. And so we really want them to get it right for the families. So this is going to be a step-by-step of how to do it. Michelle will talk with you about when you'll be getting your stool collection kits, but please go through, familiarize yourself, understand how it works so that you can show it and teach families. Just to point out, there are gel packs, ice gel packs that are in the kits. We'll have to, you know, those have to be frozen. Families have to get those things frozen before they stick them, you know, the stool in it. And that's before they stick the packs and then the stool into the styrofoam to ship it. So you'll have to, you know, work with families to make sure that they freeze those gel packs, etc. Next slide. Okay, so 3-day diet diary collection. We will, so we talked about those as well. 3-day diet diaries collected, again, baseline and each of the 4 periods, just, you know, just like the stool, doesn't have to be at the same time as the stool, but just the same number of times as the stool. So related to the 3-day diet diaries, you'll want to explain to families that participants will complete the 3-day diet diaries at home during baseline, and for the diet diaries, we want it at the midpoint of each treatment. The stool, we were saying get it towards the end. For the diet diaries, we're saying get it at the midpoint, and that's because the dietitian will be using it when she talks to the family to see how they're doing with their diets, and she'll be talking to the families at the midpoint of each period. So that's the reason for that timing. Ensure patients understand that these diet diaries are critical to evaluate their nutritional status and to adjust clinical care if necessary. So yes, we absolutely want them for the research. We need the good data, but clinical care is going to be based on this. So it's really important that they, again, get us these diet diaries and have them as complete as possible. You'll want to ensure that patients understand that for accurate analysis, they have to be as specific as possible with the brand, with the food eaten, with the amount. If they're not, you guys will have to call, you and the dietitian will have to coordinate and figure out who will call to follow up by phone to get all that extra information before we can analyze the diet diaries. And so that's really critical. So the more people can understand up front, the better. We'll have sample diet diaries for you to go through with people so that they understand and have an example of what we're looking for. And the diet diaries will be analyzed, and dietitians will follow up them with families to provide recommendations as appropriate. And so your job is to really ensure that the family is given a 3-day diet diary, coordinate with the dietitian around who will instruct the family how to complete. I would guess that may vary by center and by dietitian in terms of their preference of how much time you spend with them on how to do the diet diary versus the dietitian, but that has to happen. They have to know what needs to be done. And then you need to ensure that the family knows that completed diet diaries get emailed back to you and that they have the correct email address to do that. And we want them emailed back as soon as they're done because then you're going to be sending them out to Seattle for analysis. Next slide. Okay, yeah, so what that didn't say on that slide, I wasn't sure if we had another slide with that or not, is that, and again, we will talk with you and it'll be in the SOPs, but you will be emailing those out to Seattle for analysis. And I think we talk about it a little bit farther in this deck, and then Seattle sends the analysis back to you. So print materials and scheduling. So at the baseline visit, you will give families, so now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the materials that you're going to be giving families. You will give them the produce folder that includes all study handouts and instructions. So we will be making packets for you for each family that has all the handouts in it, has the stool instructions, so that you'll have these packets all set to go and ready for the families. You'll also have a place where you can print extras, etc. But we want to start you off and make it a little bit easier so that you just have all the resources in one place in a folder to give to families. We will give you the Nimble book, so we'll be sending you those as well. Nimble is a book that was written by one of the study co-investigators, Dr. David Suskin, who's an expert in the specific carbohydrate diet. So it's, again, resources for families on how to do this diet. And then you will be giving out as well the families one stool kit. They will be getting 5 over the course of the study, but we don't want to give them all at once. We will give 1 at this baseline visit. And then CRC should schedule follow-up visits prior to the family leaving. We talked about this a little bit already, but the next visit is the first dietitian and clinic visit, and then there's the standard of care visit, and about 10 weeks after the baseline visit. And then there's a subsequent dietitian and clinic visit about 12 weeks after the baseline visit. And you'll want to get those all scheduled and on the books and work with families to make sure that they know that if something needs to change, that they call you as soon as possible to reschedule, because we need to adhere to the protocol timeline. Next slide. Okay, and then you'll hand off to the dietitian for diet education. The family will meet with the dietitian to receive training in the SCD and if appropriate, if they were randomized to the MSCD diet. The dietitian session can only occur, it's very important, after you've consented them. So consents have to be complete. The family has to have downloaded the Eureka app, and they have to have completed all the baseline questionnaires. So all of those things must happen before the dietitian meets with them. If you have other work to do with the family, you can squeeze the dietitian in between first these things happening and the rest of what you have to do with the family. But these are critical things that must happen first. Consent, Eureka app downloaded, and all the baseline questionnaires done. And then when you hand off to the dietitian, you're going to make sure that she or he knows what the starting diet is, information about vitamin D level, if it is available, if we have a recent one on the patient, and then the produce folder that we talked about, so she can review it as well with the participant based on what she's doing. Next slide. Great. And then this is just, there will be a ECRF form for baseline visit documentation. This is just an example of what that will look like and what you will be filling out at that visit. Next slide.
Lisa, this is Michelle. If you just want to touch on, as you're going through this, the kind of the window surrounding all these visits. I know we had a question about that yesterday with the PI training too. So just we had a question from one of the attendees about that. So if you just want to touch on kind of the 1 to 2 week period that's built in around that, around the visit, okay, to make sure they're not deviating from the protocol.
Yep. Okay. So the next visit that comes up, so after baseline, the family goes home. And one of the key things that's critical that the family understands at the baseline visit is they should not change anything. Do not change what you're eating. They will be getting diet education, but they cannot utilize that education for 2 weeks. Because if they don't keep on their same baseline diet, they're not going to have a good comparison for what the other diet, how the study diets are impacting them. And remember, in this study, because it's N of 1, patients are going to get specific information that's just relevant to them to say, what was the impact of the diet for you on your particular symptoms? They will learn that at the end of the study. So they really need to keep a good baseline usual diet period so they have a good comparison. And so that's really important that they really kind of make it very clear, when you go home, do not change anything for 2 weeks. Their app will signal them when it's time to start the N of 1 trial in 2 weeks. Over that 2 week baseline, they can start to be preparing what they should do, how they can get ready for the SCD diet, and the dietitian has learned that and will work with them on that. But that's what they can do over that 2 week baseline, but keep their diet the same. The app signals when to start the N of 1 trial. You'll know when they've started from looking at it on their Eureka platform. And then the dietitian visit should be about 2 weeks after starting diet A. Michelle, I don't have the protocol in front of me. I'm assuming the window for this dietitian visit is 1 to 3 weeks. Is it like 2 weeks plus or minus 1 week? Is that, you can chime in if you sure you know.
Yeah, I think the way we wrote it, we want to give a little wiggle room, so at least 1 week on either side, on either side.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's just a good point to make for people too. You have the protocol, you'll have the final version. What we have on this slide, which I think is a really critical slide for you guys to just see the whole study flow up front and where people are coming. We have recommendations, but in the protocol, you'll see what the wiggle room is around that. And that's because we recognize in reality how hard it is to sometimes get things scheduled with people's calendars and schedules, both the patients and your guys and the dietitian and everyone. So there is some wiggle room, but you'll want to make sure that you check in the protocol what that wiggle room is so that you're falling within that.
Yeah. Okay. So the dietitian visits, like we said, these are in-person, in-clinic visits where the patient is seeing the dietitian and yourself as well to stop in and check in and see how they're doing. They are not necessarily seeing their GI physician or nurse practitioner that day, unless again your clinic decides that you want that to happen, which some clinics are sort of making that choice, or either because of payment issues or just because of the way the clinic wants to operate. So next slide. Okay, so your responsibilities at the dietitian visit. One, you want to provide the dietitian with all the needed study forms and paperwork for the visit, including the paper versions of the CRF and the blank 3-day diet diary, because now the family is going to move on to the second diet diary recording that they're doing. You'll want to check in with the family during the visit to remind them about upcoming study milestones and to review their data tracking. So really look at what they've done over that baseline period. If people are not tracking at least at a rate of 50% in the baseline period, they won't move on, be able to move on in the study, because it's very important that they track their data, their symptoms in the Eureka platform. Without that, we don't have study data. So you'll want to, review what they've done and how they're doing once they've moved on to this first diet. For families who are doing well, and we'd say, completing at least 3/4 of their trackers on Eureka, reinforce them. And, for families who are not problem-solved barriers with them of what's getting in the way, and remind them that the more data they enter, the better information they will specifically get back from the study. And then you'll want to work with the dietitian to connect the participant to any needed resources identified during the visit. You'll send the participant home now with 2 stool kits, not just 1, but 2 stool kits for the next 2 collection periods. If there's new or worsened symptoms or weight loss has been identified in the visit, you'll want to work with the dietitian and the PI to ensure that adverse event forms, study withdrawal forms are all completed in REDCap as appropriate. And then you'll want to work with the dietitian to input all of the follow-up visit information that she's filled out on her paper version of the CRF into the REDCap database. Next slide. So the ECRF includes several items such as clinic weight and height, % weight change since baseline, checking trackers in Eureka app, and lots of discussion of the diet. So again, just to give you a little bit of an example of the kind of paper-based form that she's going to be filling out, the dietitian will be filling out and handing off to you. Next slide. But you're really going to want to, I think one of the key things that you'll have to do is be, your responsibility to make sure that if there's anything that is an adverse event or symptoms that are going on, that you're hearing from the dietitian that's documented on that form, that the study PI is alerted, that the patient's primary GI is alerted, and that you determine if it should be, reported as an adverse event. And in REDCap, and to our coordinating center and subsequently IRB. So next thing that comes up in terms of an in-person visit will be the a follow-up that's done which is a standard of care visit with their primary provider. So it's really at the end of the period, once they finish diet A for 8 weeks that they've been on, they will have a regular standard of care visit with their provider. We will also, add some diet education into that regular visit. Next slide. And at the standard of care visit, you'll participate in pre-visit planning or have, you'll want to have another, as a CRC, you want to have some way to identify and ensure that you're aware of when patients involved in the study are being seen in clinic. You'll want to coordinate with the PI or primary GI provider to ensure that they are aware that this patient is involved in produce study and that they know the assessments will be used for outcome data in the study. And then you'll want to be available during the visit or after for any study-related activities like filling out CRFs, etc. So again, this is a standard of care visit. The timing is standard of care. 8 weeks after you start a diet is really standard of care. So that needs to happen and be scheduled. But you, will want to make sure that you're aware and that the GI providers are remembering that this is a study patient when they come in. Next slide. You'll make the dietitian aware of the patient visit in case that patient has questions and she's available during the time. You'll also want to ensure that lab results are available starting 1 week after the visit. So if they're not available, you want to keep checking until they are available, and make sure that these lab results get entered into the ICN registry by either doing it yourself if you're able, or coordinating with the ICN site coordinator, because it's very important that those labs that we're taking at the visit are in the registry for this study. And then if there's any follow-up needs to be coordinated after the visit, talking with the dietitian, etc., you'll want to ensure that's completed within 3 business days, or communicated to the right person to ensure it gets completed. And if there's follow-up that happens after appointments, please document that on your site contact log. And then again, you'll ensure that the next standard of care visit is scheduled as appropriate for the patient. And we are not specifying what the specific timing of that next visit. Next slide. Okay, so then the final touch point that I want, dietitian touch point that I want to talk about is the dietitian phone follow-up. These touch points are done via phone. They're not in clinic. They happen, as I talked about, at the midpoint of each of the 4 diet periods. Next slide. And so really within 4 to 5 weeks of, sort of in that of starting each of their diet periods is when we would like these phone follow-ups to happen. So ideally, the first and second phone follow-ups will be scheduled when the person is there at their dietitian in-clinic visit. So they'll be there for the in-clinic visit. You'll say, okay, in about 2 weeks, we need to talk to you by phone, and you'll schedule that, work with the dietitian to get that scheduled. The phone follow-ups in periods 3 and 4 of the diet will need to be scheduled, by phone, unless the patient, happens to be in clinic, and you can schedule it with them that way. But you'll have to take responsibility for coordinating, getting all of those phone follow-ups scheduled for the dietitian. You'll want to coordinate with the dietitian to determine who will schedule the follow-up, if it's you or her, and then follow up on that plan. You'll want to make sure that completed diet diaries must be returned from the family before the RD follow-up. So we need to have the diet diaries back. So families have to understand that, and if we don't have those diet diaries back, then it'll be difficult to do the phone follow-up. So we really need those back first. We don't have to have the nutritional analysis back from Seattle. It would be great if we do, because that would be helpful, but we don't have to have the full nutritional analysis back, but the dietitian does need the diet diary completed for those visits. And then you'll want to reach out to your site PI if you're having an ability to reach patients or scheduling those phone follow-ups, because they are a very important piece of data and clinical care as well. Next slide. And then, so you'll want to share the completed diet diaries with the dietitian within 24 hours of getting them back from the family, and determine if, follow-up is needed with the family to obtain more details on brands, amounts for nutritional analysis. When the diet diary is deemed sufficiently complete, then you'll send it to Seattle Children's Hospital, and we'll have a specific email where that goes to for nutritional analysis. This should be done as quickly as possible, and really, we want to get as rapid a turnaround as possible, so we have that nutritional analysis to guide people in their diet and in their care. Provide the diet diary and the nutritional analysis to the dietitian within 24 hours of getting it back from Seattle Children's Hospital. So as soon as you get it back, make sure you forward that to the dietitian. And then work with the dietitian to connect the participant to any needed resources identified as part of their telephone follow-up. And also work with her to ensure that all the information is available for entry into the ECRF. So the bottom line is you're going to want to get a diet diary from families back before you have the visit, the phone call visit follow-up with the dietitian. And then as soon as you get that diet diary, you want to make sure it's complete and get it out to Seattle. And again, make sure that the dietitian is getting the diet diary, that she's getting the nutritional analysis very quickly as soon as you get it, that she also gets it. Next slide. Okay, and then finally, the final touch point of the study for the clinician is going to be the results review, which happens at about 34 weeks from the time that you start the study. Next slide. And the results review is, here's what you want to do. You want to ensure that this gets scheduled at the completion of the study. So participants should come in for results review within 4 weeks after completion of the final diet. So we would say that, you know, the window there is between, you know, sort of about 2 to 4 weeks from completing that final diet. They need to be back in clinic to get the results review. And again, look at the protocol to, you know, make sure that you're in the specified window. Check to make sure final stool sample was collected. If it was not, remind the participant to do so. You'll want to be available if the site PI or GI provider needs help with getting all the relevant information from the Eureka platform. The Eureka platform is where the results review data all will be to review with the participant. So if they need some support in how to do that, you'll want to help that. And then you want to help ensure that the participant has the printed PDF of their results to take home with them, because you will be able to print from the system so that they hear the results from the doc, but also have a copy. And then you'll want to ensure final payment is made to the participant. Next slide. Okay, I think I'm stopping here, and I think I'm handing this off back to Michelle.
Yes, hi, thanks, Lisa. Okay, thanks for sticking with us, everyone. I know we don't have too much longer, so I'll go through these last slides of remaining responsibilities that we wanted to touch on today, and then we will have a little time for questions at the end. The first thing we wanted to cover is that we want to ensure that participants are paid. And so here is what the ECRF will look like in the system. And it has information on it on the payments. So for the first payments 1 through 3, you're going to want to make sure they're through the diet treatment period and they have returned the stool sample. You'll be able to check the Eureka platform to see if they answered yes, that they returned it. And then we'll also get fecal power results back to know that they have too. So you're going to want to put the payment date in and specify if you paid them or didn't and why not. And then for the last payment, that should be received after the results review and the completion of diet treatment 4. And so you're also going to want to make sure that they sent in their stool sample at that time. So you all are going to be the main monitors of the study and of the participants' progression through the study. And you're going to be doing that in the Eureka platform that we'll be training you on at a different time. And overall, you should ensure that participants are progressing through the diet periods as they should be, sending in their stool samples before progressing to the new diet treatment, completing their 3-day diet diaries in each period, making sure you're getting them, making sure they're sent to Seattle and documented, completing their visits as outlined in the protocol, and we've gone over those, and then receiving their results review data at the end of the study. You will also need to ensure, like I talked about earlier, that the data entered into the ICN registry for the study participants, so for these people, is at an 80% or greater rate. So we will be checking that throughout the study and circling back with you all if that's not the case. You do have a main role in adverse event reporting, and so you're going to need to work with your site PI or the primary GI provider or dietitian to solicit information on any changes in the patient's status after any scheduled or unscheduled contact. If you learn of an adverse event, it needs to be documented, and you need to work with whoever has learned about that to ensure that it's documented appropriately. If symptoms are worsening based on the data tracked in the Eureka app or based on reports from other patient encounters, the PI should discuss this with the primary GI provider, and a plan should be made to contact the patient and assess for treatment needs and the ability to work, the ability to continue in the study. And then you should work with the site PI to complete that adverse event form in REDCap and notify us at the site coordinating center if that is happening. In addition, these are some expected adverse events that we still want to know about, but these are when starting a dietary treatment, these are expected things that can happen. And so one is mild to moderate increase in abdominal pain, diarrhea, gas, or bloating within the first 3 to 4 weeks of starting the new diet. And we're told from our dietitians that a lot of times that has to do with all the fiber that is in the SCD, and so that might go on. But that should start getting better after the 3 to 4 weeks of the new diet. Weight loss that is greater than 5%, but less than 7.5% in the first 3 to 4 weeks of starting the new diet. And again, this is because it's such a big change. Oftentimes you do see weight loss. And then worsening of IBD due to failure on the diet to improve the disease. This could be manifested as new onset or worsened bloody stools, diarrhea, abdominal pain, fistula, abscess, or bowel obstruction. And then, as you all know, working in clinics with these kiddos, sometimes hospitalizations or surgeries due to failure of treatment occurs. And in this case, it would be failure of the diet to improve their disease. And so we would need to know about all of those things and have the appropriate forms filled out. Any adverse events that are unexpected and are deemed by the site PI as either possibly or definitely related to the intervention will be summarized in narrative or other format and submitted to the IRB at the time of continuing review, and will be reported to the IRB at the time of continuing review. Okay, and so you'll also need to document any protocol deviations. And a deviation is documented when a site is found to have deviated from the protocol, instructions, MOP, or other standard procedure. We'll have specific forms for these available for you all. And again, hopefully you won't need them, but if you do, they're standard forms where you will fill out that information. And then a violation is a more serious deviation. And this would include harm or increased risk of harm to one or more of the research subjects or damage to the scientific integrity of the data collected for the study. This would need to be reported right away and dealt with. And then notes to file are more just, you know, not as serious as a deviation or violation, but need to be written when any interaction or change of plan, alteration from the protocol or other event occurs. And we'll have a note to file form for you all as well. Okay, and the last couple of things we want to touch on are the communications between you all and the participants, and then you all and us at the coordinating center. So for the communications between you all and the participants, as you've seen, there are numerous touch points with participants throughout the study that need to be documented appropriately. In addition, you are going to write down any contact you have with participants in the site contact log and upload that to Zythos monthly so we can review it. And we would like for you to have easy ways for the participant to reach you, and ideally have a backup at your site, whoever that may be, that they could contact if it's urgent. And so ideally you'll give them an email that goes directly to you, a phone number that goes directly to you, and then ensure that this information is on the documents you send him in the produce participant packet for easy reference. And then for communication between you all and us at the coordinating center, we will continue our activation huddles, and we'll change them to study recruitment and conduct huddles upon activation. We will have activation calls with each of you before you begin the study. And as always, you can reach out via email or phone with any questions. And those are some of the study contacts. A new contact for you there, or a couple of new contacts, are probably the produce.health. So that's going to be a main way to get us information throughout the study. You know my email. And then Sally Pope-Smith is our new research coordinator that's going to be working with us. And then Heather and Lisa, who are the co-PIs on the project, can also be reached. So for finally the next steps, after this training today, we really want you to read through the SOPs and write down any questions that you have. So we'll be getting those to you. We're really going to want you to personalize the swim lanes for your site. So we'll get you copies of those as well. And then over the next couple of months, depending on where we are in the process in November and December, we will schedule an activation call with you all to discuss SOPs and any questions, to look over those personalized swim lanes and discuss the plan for recruitment at your site. We will also be reaching out with that Eureka app training in the next month or two to get you trained on that before you are activated. Okay, those are the slides we have. I know we just have a couple of minutes left. I will check to see if there's any questions. Again, you can chat them in or raise your hand. It looks like maybe Trevor has another question. Trevor, I'll unmute you. I cannot unmute you. If you want to chat it in, it says a pin's been sent to you. So you can either chat it in, or if you have got that pin, you can type that in, and then you should become unmuted. If we answered your question, if the only question was about the windows around the visits, I can even get you the specifics of it, but it is in the protocol as well, and it should be that 1 week on either end. Okay, thanks, Trevor. Trevor said he doesn't have any other questions. And it looks like maybe Amy, you have a question. I will unmute you. Okay, Amy, you should be unmuted. Hey.
Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Can maybe Dr. Kaplan or any of you, I guess, just clarify about around eligibility when patients might be on other trials?
Heather, you want to address that?
Yeah. So we have, I think, and this is actually feedback from one of you guys, at one of our community, I think at the community conference. So if someone else is in it, and if they're in another interventional trial where they may be having other study procedures that would affect the results of what they're doing in our study, and vice versa for that other study. So even specifically for combined, let's say, that the being in both studies at the same time will affect the results of each independently. So we don't want patients that are in another study at the same time, because then whatever they're doing for that study, whether it be the procedures or something interventional, could impact their results in our study, and they won't get as good results for themselves.
Okay, so I just want to clarify. So are you saying it's up to the investigator to decide that, or you just want to go with a flat, like, don't be in another study?
The way you wrote it was don't be another interventional study.
Okay.
So is that what you're looking for, more clarity on what do we mean by interventional study?
I guess so, yeah.
Okay. I mean, we can
not to have to nail it down right this second, but
right.
My PI after the training yesterday was texting me saying, "What does this mean?"
Yeah. Okay. So, well, that's good to know then, because then that probably means we need we want to have things applied in a similar fashion across the study sites. So if that's a point that needs more clarification, then we can provide that for you guys.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Amy. I do not see any other hands up or any other question marks, and there are no other chats. It is 1:01. So I guess, Heather and Lisa, do you have anything else to add before we sign off?
Nope, just thanks everyone for your time, and we're super excited to get things rolling. And again, as we said at the beginning, as you start to digest, these are all, it sounds like your PI too, Amy, was starting to digest after yesterday's training with them. So as you start to digest and these questions come up, please, like sooner rather than later, actually reach out to us so that we have more flexibility in being able to tweak things to meet your, to address some of these issues, because we did our best to come up with the sticking points or to imagine hypothetical situations and what would you do in that situation, but I'm sure we didn't get them all. So if you come up with something, please, sooner rather than later, let us know, or questions will only make things better.
Okay, thanks everyone. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.